Hi, welcome back to my channel. This lighting is super awkward and weird, so I'm just gonna try and make the most of what I've got with it. But I've got some more information which has been helping me thrive in the whole narcissistic abuse realm and stuff that has kind of come to me recently, just in the whole thriving area, because it's kind of been a gradual process of obviously surviving to thriving. Basically there's a medium ground, I'm sure, but anyway, these are some of the ideas that I've come across which I'd like to share. So basically, just connoting, let me get some a bit of there we go, connoting motives early on and setting boundaries early on is one thing that has come to me. So I mentioned in a past video how I've noticed that a lot of people can have differing traits. Not every single narcissist comes in the same box, or toxic person. You've got people with borderline traits that are going to be, difficult and fear rejection, and have some qualities that kind of just are fear rejection and can be very volatile in certain areas, but some borderlines aren't volatile. I don't want to go into all of the variations, but you can get people that are psychopathic. They say all covert narcissists are also psychopaths. You get people that are sociopathic, you get narcissists that aren't sociopathic. You just get such a variety of toxicity in different people. But connoting toxic patterns early on in relationships can really help bolster to a sort of logistic level what you kind of are willing to, what I've heard, put in your porch, if you of behaviour, and what to not internalise, because obviously the rule of toxic people is that you're not obviously responsible for their sort of personality disorder traits. I'm not expecting them to be anything they're not. This was a sense of reducing resentment towards yourself and towards life, because this is something that's really difficult to come to, especially if you've experienced abuse throughout childhood or wherever else, be that sexual, physical, verbal, even in adulthood and stuff. You can carry these patterns of making the most of an abuser or an abusive situation, and you don't really fully maybe you haven't fully processed or healed from it, whatever, or you still carry similar patterns perhaps from a relationship or whatever that might either still be in your life or was a long-standing relationship that you haven't really healed from, or whatever else. And it's just about discerning that fact, I suppose. And because you're going to have resentment against people that have poor boundaries. It's a sense of resentment that you get often with people that have poor boundaries, from the person with poor boundaries, because they obviously are set or calibrated to a point where they will receive abuse, or they'll tolerate it, or they'll allow it in some way. And then they'll become very resentful that person's not reciprocating the same sort of amount of effort even that they're putting in. If it's not a physically abusive relationship, maybe they're just tolerating some form of emotional abuse or psychological abuse. And obviously an abuser often, or a toxic person, is not capable of actually giving love, I suppose, in the same way that your average person would without personality disorder traits. So when that love is not, or when that respect or things that they're not able to actually give because of their innate disordered sort of self is not being reciprocated, someone can get very, very, very resentful, and that's obviously a given, but sometimes it's just a subconscious process, and it's a repetitive process that can be very wearing on your just energy and just life force, because you're just not really aware that that's happening. So that's something to bear in mind. So sensing passive aggression early on, and setting boundaries, I've already said that. Hard to realise that it can be very difficult to come to the realisation that you've either been used, or you can feel very dirty to actually come to the realisation that you've either been used or love bombed in order to be discarded. It's a very tangible feeling that a lot of people that have experienced abuse in childhood or whatever, most people that have had that situation, will deal with it through denial, especially if they feel they have no other option in order to process it. And it's such a normal response used by so many people. And when you perpetuate this denial into adulthood, it's really can be really damaging, because obviously you're then in cognitive dissonance around other forms of abuse, if that makes sense. And I've also throughout this put a couple of things that have been projected on me that might have also been projected on you, in terms of things that you might have internalized about yourself, because a lot of things that are projected on you by toxic people, you have, like, obviously they have, like, you know, things like unstable emotion that can be projected on you in so many ways, in repetitive ways, and you can integrate that emotion and also projection into your personality, which can be really damaging to your self-image and self-esteem, but also just like generally just unhealthy towards, you know, to go through life with that sort of mentality that that's not valid, to be fair, and it's obviously just another person's bad energy. So whether you want to believe in things like praying, or, you know, from a spiritual sense, I'm just going to put it out there, like whether you like literally believe this or not, I think holistic stuff and spiritual stuff is very personal to me, and it's just obviously personal to different people. But even things like spells, like witchcraft wise, like you can be like, send this bad energy back to the person, and I'm just being honest, and things that work for me, it's like remove this like negative attachment, kind of, or prayer or whatever, just something like manifestation or whatever you want to call it, in terms of like separating from that sort of like bad stuff. And also like burning like broken bridges has been something that's kind of like been prevalent for me recently, because like toxic people often they just try and like root their way back into your life somehow, even if you know that they're not going to make it there, they'll still try. So you've got to burn those bridges in order to actually not fully, but you know, it can just really help create a lot more space in your own life. So for example, like if someone else has an addictive personality, it's known that in certain types of borderline people, or people with borderline traits, they've got like addictive tendencies, and I feel like this was reflected on me. For example, you know, I'm not going to go into all of like my personal experience, but it's like I know that I could have been, or could still potentially internalise some of the stuff that's been projected on me in terms of me having addictive personality. Because the thing about toxic people as well is they genuinely believe their like delusion, like in terms of like toxicity and stuff. Like people that have like a natural, normal, healthy level of narcissism, like, you know, they might use like a healthy level of narcissism to like tackle a stressful situation, in terms of like, yeah, I'm not fully prepared for this test, but I've tried my best to learn it in this short period of time that I've actually, you know, been you know, researching it and whatever, and sorry, I just thought something, I think it's down there, but I want to make sure I say it. Sorry. So, so I think I was talking about how, yeah, just basically some people will, the toxic people, they believe they're narcissistic sort of delusion or borderline delusion or whatever, well, because it's part of, you know, what's disordered about them. Like, you know, some people like, and this is why it gets really, you know, difficult, when there's so many like variations, which I was looking into on, like, again, I'm not qualified like psychologist or anything, but in the like DSM you've got like different categories of people with different like issues. So you've got like, but in that list, I'm not going to go through like all of the list, but it's interesting to look at, like when you have people that are varied between narcissism and they're paranoid and they're grandiose, like it's like they have this like concoction of like thoughts which are just like what they are. But for example, if someone's also aggressive, if someone's paranoid and aggressive, and you don't validate their sense of self, which is based on some sort of paranoid ego self, so like whatever they feel will protect them against their paranoia, like they're some sort of grandiose, you know, perfect superhuman being or whatever in their own minds, you know, that could be a really dangerous situation if someone's also aggressive. It's really, really important to bear that sort of stuff in mind when like navigating life and just being, you know, going through it and whatever. So also this is kind of a sense of like living in the world among other people. I'm very much a believer of like follow God and your own path with God. Obviously it's like not like my place to say like everyone has their own route. There's this thing called a prescribed will from God and a something else, like a basically Bible way of going about life. But you know, we have our own path and we have the way that general morality works and, you know, stuff like universal laws and blah blah. But we also have our own path, and very much a case of like, you know, don't worship the world, like worship any God, and whether you're religious or not, you know, putting other people on this like sort of like narcissistic pedestal or whatever naturally is not going to be healthy. And a lot of people just literally need that and won't tolerate anything less. So those people are toxic and need to be removed, in my opinion. But in terms of other people, I think a lot of the time if you've been abused as a child or you've been repetitively conditioned in a way, you can worry that other people see the toxic person in the same light as you've been conditioned to. But often it's interesting to note that even if you've got this like conditioned delusional mindset of the toxic person, even to this day, and you're still conditioned in that way, it's really interesting to see how people that haven't been conditioned in the same way don't see them in the same way that you do. And that just shatters the entire thing really, and makes everything sort of be a bit more in perspective, because you can be brainwashed at the end of the day, and that's what these toxic people do throughout life to kind of, you know, keep you in a submissive position and weakened and, you know, worshipping them or whatever they need, be that sociopathic or psychopathic or whatever. And that's kind of the idea. But everyone has their own perspective and they'll make their own judgment at the end of the day. Yeah, you're going to get other narcissistic people that are going to, you know, be flying monkeys, which are, you know, narcissistic followers and validators and enablers and whatever. And people that kind of join in with the sort of like delusion and support them in their way of being, whatever. You might call it like narcissistic friends. Narcissists don't have friends, they have people that they dominate and sort of abuse, and that's just literally how it is. They don't have friendship doesn't serve a narcissist, if you didn't know. But a lot of people are not narcissistic, or like, you know, an unhealthy level of narcissistic, or, you know, toxic in whatever sense, and don't have personality related disorders. They just kind of are typical, or they're empathic, or they are, you know, just not of that persuasion, and they will make that judgment of that person themselves, and it's not for you to worry that you know, being naive in a sense will you know will make any difference to how the world views that person. Even if you enable that person's still going to be viewed as they are by all of the world, hence their, you know, paranoia, which, you know, and obviously fear of rejection, which they will receive anyway because they have personality related issues, you know. But it's a case of like other people will make their own judgments as well, which is validating for you and kind of helps you break away from the delusion. I'm not saying like you should consult another person when judging each person. It's very important to have your own view as well. But in terms of breaking away in that period of transition and healing from narcissistic abuse, especially when it's been prolonged, it's really validating to watch other people see the person for how they are and not validate their sense of grandiosity and see that innate obvious thing, which, you know, I'm just saying people are more smart than people think. So even if that person needs to delude themselves, which takes a lot of mental energy, so I do pity them, but at the same time, pity is the wrong word for a narcissist. You shouldn't pity toxic people because they're toxic. It's like, would you pity like a poisonous snake if it just, you know, preys on everything? Like, you're not going to pity a snake, are you? You're just going to like be like, oh, get away from me kind of thing. That's the same way as you should look at toxic people, if you ask me. So yeah, it does. Also, being abused yourself does not change how other people view you. It might, okay, that's a lie. I think it does change how people view you, but it doesn't make you a toxic person. It doesn't make you a narcissistic person. You know, maybe you have traits of borderline. It's easy to be said that, you know, people say that borderline people have trauma, they have like potentially CPTSD traits, and I know that but they say once you heal from that stuff, borderline traits do dissipate, and that's something I've experienced in myself. My fear of rejection is massively dissipated, because why would you have a fear of rejection? And that's what people that have been abused or have poor boundaries have. So it lines up very closely. I'm not saying I'm not a curer of people with borderline personality disorder, I'm not a psychologist, but this is the general thing. If you're, borderline traits, whether seen in yourself or wherever, do dissipate once you heal more emotionally. It's just proven. Because it lines up with obviously the fact of why you fearing rejection, because you've been rejected in the past by toxic people which want to reject you to break you down as a person. So just as people, and this was the thing, people view you for how you are as well. So if you're an empathic person, it's not for you to worry that you shouldn't show yourself because a level of shame because you fear that you're going to be like the toxic person, because sometimes when you've been projected on that amount of times, that can be some sort of like distortion that can come up. And it has done for me, and it doesn't make you a narcissist if you've been abused. In fact, they're very much opposites. They say you can go down the narcissistic route or you can go down the empathic route. Apparently there's actually variations in between. Obviously people that are empathic can pick up narcissistic traits if they've been narcissistically abused, so it's just, there is, but generally that's also, it is a recognised thing that you go down one way or the other generally. But people don't view you as a narcissist because you have been abused. That's just something really important to take on. And they don't view you as wrong. The thing is, they might not have as much, the difference here is that they might take you a little bit less seriously or have a little bit less respect for you if you're not fully assertive, and that's just the level of law of attraction. It comes from the idea, not that you should blame yourself for these situations, because if you're in a place where you're living your life but you're maybe not fully assertive, that's a great place to be. That's where I am. That's a great place. That shows a lot of healing, and it shows I'm almost at full thriving. But just because I feel like sometimes, and I think life comes in twos and threes, and sometimes I'm really assertive and you have to be, but I feel like I'm building my assertiveness, and it's a case of, and I am assertive, but in new situations and stuff I can be a bit apprehensive, and I think that's kind of normal. But at the same time, it comes from a sense of people, if you've been abused, you can kind of have this sense of I need to scan the room first, I'm in danger kind of lizard brain mentality, and it just means that you're not as confident as someone that maybe hasn't gone through that situation. And that's really where it comes from, and it just means that other people might have to work a little bit harder to meet you there, and that's the only reason why maybe they don't lose respect for you so much, but maybe they just lose, it's just a little bit more of an unbalanced relationship. So I think the goal that I'm striving towards is having balanced relationships, but it's hard to have a balanced relationship with someone that isn't going to meet you halfway. Not that you should meet everyone halfway, and I think part of life is like, obviously I was doing a little bit of work on yin and yang recently, and this thing called Wan Qing, really random, I'm not going to go into that stuff, but people's yins and their yangs and their energies can be slightly mismatched. So just because you don't have a completely perfectly aligned conversation with someone doesn't make you unassertive or assertive or too assertive or not assertive at all. It's just the twos and throws of life. But at the same time, putting this sort of in context in terms of how you can be less assertive, it's important. As I say, I think in terms of recovery, it's such a to and fro process, and you have to just take where you are and accept it and be, grateful and sort of like give yourself a lot of compassion and validation, because that's another thing which I'll get onto. But validation, narcissists don't validate. They will never validate you. They will literally never ever validate you. And I've heard this so many times off different channels on narcissism. And I'm like, yeah. And I totally understand it. But I'm really, 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 really starting to understand it like naturally and cognitively now. They don't validate people because they can't, because they won't. They don't validate themselves. They're on this consistent, I'm so scared kind of mentality. My ego's going to be exposed, blah, blah, paranoia kind of frantic mode most of the time, especially when they're dealing with someone like you that might be like a healed person. They're on this frantic mode like most of the time when dealing with other people, probably, unless they're with people that they know are just going to validate them. But if you're just a person that maybe doesn't, they're in this frantic mode of they don't validate themselves. They just work off lies often. Like covert narcissists, they work from lies. They have a delusional mindset as a set point. They can't rationalize take accountability, look within, they're unable to reflect internally. So it can also leave you with a sense of lack, like if you've been brought up in this situation, it can leave you with an inability to reflect, something that I experienced in the past. If you're brought up around this sort of situation, you have to learn how to reflect as an adult, because you might not have learnt how to do that. They talk a lot about in narcissistic abuse, when you're not built properly as a person, you have to build yourself or rebuild yourself as a person. And it's a lot of work, I'm not going to lie, but it is possible. I'm living proof. Thank God for that. So people, yeah. And I find that when you actually do learn how to take more assertiveness, build more boundaries with toxic people, which I'll get onto more, build more discernment against people that are toxic, as I said, and live more autonomously and less scared and vigilant, and have that sort of, grounding and healing in order to move through life in a sense where you can probably handle these situations better, and you've got more sort of a calibrated, healthy set point, in terms of, because emotions and stuff that you're brought up around, things like shame, things like guilt, things like, despair and sort of, hopelessness, if you've been brought up around narcissism and toxic people, it might be a set point for you, and that's the unfortunate truth. It could be, and people learn to deal with this stuff, they live with it, and it happens a lot. But it's possible to change that set point emotion to something a lot better, like hope and discernment and faith and joy and peace and gratitude. That is kind of where I've come from, more and more so as I get more and more healed, and it really, really makes a massive difference to your general vibrational state. Because these people do want to keep you in guilt, shame, whatever. Something when you go into just the very early stages of understanding narcissism, I noticed, people notice stuff at different times, but I noticed very, very early, because they just need people to be stuck in that low vibrational state so they can feel superior and validate their sense of self. So, again, another way of reducing resentment is to realise that you can't control other people. You can't control people with personality problems. You can set boundaries and stand by them. Because it's not a case of I don't think you should ever beat yourself up for a slip up or someone taking advantage. I think I've heard this thing before, and I'm learning more about not exposing everything that can be harmful towards you, because if people find out things about you, they can weaponize it. If they're toxic and they want to harm, and some people do, it can be used as a weapon. But some people, the abuse that someone gives you is always in the fault of the person. But unfortunately, when people overshare to the point where they may be giving information that makes themselves vulnerable, which is actually, the person can blame themselves for oversharing the information that was then used against them. But the point of people oversharing is that they want to build that connection with that person. They don't feel validated or empowered enough to build that connection with someone that is healthy, potentially, or they're still trying to maintain this relationship with an unhealthy person. They think, if I give, I'll receive love back. Obviously, that's never going to happen with a toxic person. It's this sense of cognitive dissonance. And it's really just about processing that, and that's something I'm still doing. So maybe that's me oversharing. Let's not think about that, But there we go. Next thing is, narcissists can't have peace. They feel entitled to your peace and to disrupt your peace. And you don't have to share this mindset. I definitely think when God grants you peace, no one can take away what God gave you. And I definitely feel this massive sense of overwhelming peace that I've prayed about and prayed for over lockdown, and I've received from God. But the fact is, some people are unable to feel that peace that you feel in life. And it's just the sad truth. You need to come to a realisation of this. A lot of people, because of their natural ingrained entitlement, they feel entitled to your peace. They feel entitled to disrupt your peace. You might argue some people all have a sense of peace, and maybe they do, but that's not something that you need to worry about. And it's not. But the thing is about untitled people, especially if they're sociopathic, or psychopathic, or the narcissists innately disrupt boundaries. They don't respect boundaries. And it's a case of, it's not for you to manage that. If you have your peace, you need to stand in your peace and realise that it doesn't need to be shared with anyone that you don't choose to share it with, and it won't be, you know, if you don't choose it, you know, and you pray, you know, I don't want to, whether you pray or not, you know, you make a spell where narcissistic invalidation creates low quality relationships from forming and putting them in control, and it's not equally yoked. I think I've kind of gone into this already. By that I mean that when you're invalidated by a narcissist, you can mimic this pattern in other relationships that you have that are healthy. And if people are understanding, or to some level, you know, usually in healthy relationships, there's a lot of lee room with people that, I'm just wondering if I can get my drink. As I was saying, yeah, narcissistic relationships, they are invalidating by nature, as in they invalidate you. You might overly validate them because they won't accept anything less. But they will invalidate you through, you know, just like, you know, they just will. It's just inevitable. Every path leads to invalidation with a narcissist. God, I sound like the Narcissistic Abuse Recovery channels. Yay, mine's actually like almost fully recovered and I'm thriving. That's good news. Not that this is a Narcissistic Abuse Recovery channel, but if anyone wants to hear this, it is very helpful. So yeah, so narcissistic invalidation, you can mimic patterns. This is more stuff I'm going to talk about. You can mimic patterns in narcissistic abuse in your healthy relationships, and some people might cognitively understand this. If they're on your level, you know, and they know you've got a narcissistic person in your life or recovering from that stuff, they might just click, you know, and often people do, and I think that's what's happened in my life for a lot of my life. Obviously, with different people, you swing to different mentalities, like everything changes every day, and you might pick up different habits and drop different habits throughout life, just through various life experiences. But if you've been chronically invalidated, it's easy to not only invalidate yourself, but carry that through to other healthy relationships that you might have, and it creates low quality relationships from forming, and not putting it, sorry. Yeah, so, and then this puts them in control, because even if they do like, maybe it doesn't, maybe it doesn't. It's just a case of like, you're again putting a bit of more pressure on that person than they could have had in the first place. And it's just about realising that you're doing that and being aware, I suppose, as a recovering person, to just put yourself back in the driver's seat, and not in the driver's seat, but in an equally yoked situation. Hopefully, if that's the relationship you're in and it's healthy, then, you know, that should be fine. But it depends how much that person, you know, is aware of this sort of pattern. But in terms of finding new relationships, like, it can scare people off, because, you know, no one wants to be invalidated. Like, if I was to come, you know, people can sense a level of trauma on that level. This is what I mean. Just as people can sense toxic people can sense trauma. And I'm not saying like it's a bad thing, because, like, I'm not saying like I need like millions more friends, but in terms of like making new friends and actually not being scary to them and relationships and whatever, you don't want to come into that place with through a lens of trauma, because, you know, it's just a repelling situation from both sides. You're afraid of them, even if you don't need to be, because of the lens of trauma you're seeing it through, and they can sense that you're deeply traumatized, and they might sense that you're not even in the place for that sort of relationship or friendship or whatever. And not in a weird narcissistic way where a narcissist will say, oh, well, you're not in a narcissistic relationship to get more supply off you and get loads of loyalty off you, like, just for like no reason. Like, you might genuinely not be in the place, and I don't need to make millions of friends right now. But in terms of when I do want to attract the right people into my life, it shouldn't be from a lens of trauma, and I don't want to then invalidate another person and make them manage my trauma in that way. Not to say that good people don't recognise that sort of stuff, as I said. Not taking joint responsibility for abuse, and this is a level of fawning. Yeah, if you've sort of experienced abuse, and it's well known that people that are narcissistic and psychopathic don't take accountability for their actions, They might take accountability from a cognitive level and might even recognise it to an extent, but especially people that are psychopathic, they don't take any responsibility, and covert narcissists have a level of psychopathy. Most narcissists won't take responsibility either, but they do. I don't think they have a level of foresight, but they do have a level of guilt. So if they're a self-aware narcissist, they might actually somehow understand cognitively that they've done something to offend and take responsibility, but often when someone takes joint responsibility for a situation that's where you're being abused and they're abusing, it comes from a level of fawning and making the best out of a situation, as I said, and it really needs to be rectified as an adult in order to actually go through life and not have that happen, because until you actually do recalibrate, you'll keep attracting that sort of level of stuff, and it's just not healthy. Again, more narcissistic projection and processing that is, people might say, like, thing about narcissistic projection, which is amusing, but also at the same time not good, because even if you get this on a logistic level, in the back of your mind, you can actually internalize this stuff. I'm going to put this on a different video and make maybe a part 2, or maybe I'll put it all in. I might just put it into a part 2 actually, because this is going on a little bit, or whether I'll filter it all into one level because my video is about to switch off. Okay, so I was just talking about how sometimes people in narcissistic projection will project, like, from a narcissistic level, they can't take innate responsibility, and it's kind of amusing to watch them kind of deflect their problems on other people, because it can give a very clear image of who they are when they do that. But on a subconscious level, you can still internalise, because narcissists aren't stupid at the end of the day. Even though they're giving away every single facet of their insecurity by abusing you, it's still a case of they kind of, some can worm their way in by being clever and making up stories and sort of like storylines in order to project that on you and perpetuate that in this what they call steadfast way, where maybe you're not receiving flowers or validating them when they're love bombing you and kind of sort of giving you all like loads of good stuff, but they kind of get a leg in by doing something. And this is a form of safe porting. I'm kind of dropping a couple of vocab words here. Safe porting is where people kind of like have this sense of like, hey, I've done this for you, so you need to do this for me. It's this sort of like you can't say no mentality, and that's the kind of stuff you need to break. Like, hey, I'm your family member, so I can abuse you, or I can treat you how I want because that's the way I see it. Or, I paid for this and we were friends like 10 years ago, so like you need to do me this favour. Like, obviously that's a level of like logistically you can be like, but there's a lot of stuff that people do. Or, I live with you, so I have a right to come across into your personal space. It's just not true, but people will safe port people in that way, even if it's very under the radar. And it's very real. And it's about being aware of those sort of safe porting avenues and making sure you're defending yourself against you. Because there's a thing of when you defend yourself, there's nothing an abuser can do about that. When you defend yourself, when you are healed and when you are aware and when you are elevated and your consciousness expands and you heal your broken consciousness, and you're aware of their ways and you're not necessarily tolerating their abuse anymore, there's nothing they can do about that. And people will put you in this sense of fatalism, in terms of you're going to have to deal with me forever because they have to deal with themselves forever. So it's another narcissistic projection. You don't have to deal with them forever. They have to deal with themselves forever, but you don't have to deal with them forever. And the chances are you won't. If you're being abused, you'll get to a point where you heal from it and you discern from it. It's just the way of life. This too shall pass, it says in the Bible. So you don't have to tolerate it forever, and that's a very sad thing that they have to deal with, but it's not something that you have to deal with. Also, another thing you can copy, I mentioned in the last part, which was that you can copy patterns of narcissistic indifference and this can be because of mimicking, as as someone that's experienced it in the past, or having flat affect, in terms of this can come from neglect, or shallow affect, because narcissists and psychopaths, they have this shallow affect mentality of they're shallow people in general, so they often can't, when someone has a healthy range of emotion which isn't sort of like dominated by their need to protect their ego, which is kind of the basis of narcissism, you know, they have this shallow affect, and that can have a real, you know, effect on someone potentially growing up in that situation, because, you know, a child needs that sort of interaction and social engagement, you know, and when a child grows up, they can have that shallow affect themselves because they haven't been stimulated in that way, and you can just sort of mimic this sense of narcissistic indifference, which narcissistic indifference is how they validate their superiority and kind of withdraw from a situation, being like, I'm indifferent from this situation, I'm better than this situation, I've elevated from this situation, I don't need you to, you know, it's a sense of like, you know, projection that they have, that most people don't have that sort of sense of entitled indifference that other narcissists do. Whether it's, you know, vulnerable narcissism, it can be a sense of I can step back because, you know, I'm not, you know, I don't need to be in this situation, like that's not something that interests me, and you know, even if they just shade into the background, it's like I'm entitled enough to actually not listen to you because I don't need to, you know. So even if it's from that sense, I'm not saying shy people isn't the same as being shy and sort of introverting. It's not the same thing. It's a sense of whether you're a vulnerable narcissist or whether you're a grandiose narcissist, both of them are entitled, and have this sense of superiority and grandiosity. I hope my phone doesn't turn off during this. Plug it in. Sorry, I don't want it to like cut off halfway through. So not allowing yourself to be exposed to flying monkeys or other people, or paraded like a narcissistic reward or supply of others. I think when you've experienced long-standing abuse, it can just be a pattern that you inflict upon yourselves or expose yourself to, in terms of not having that sort of divine sense of validated protection. Even if it might be divine, you'll be divinely protected regardless, if you ask me. It's important, I think, to be conscious of the fact that you are an autonomous being, and you don't need to be validated by others and paraded around like some form of supply for others and some form of reward for others, a narcissistic reward, and only valuable if you are of use to a narcissist, because narcissists use people. And it can just be this sort of like ingrained subconscious belief, even if you're not consciously aware of it. You can have this sense of like, you know, I need to be sort of validated by others, I need to expose myself to other people like flying monkeys and whatever, because that's just the way it is. And it's not, and you can choose to not do that, and you can stand in your autonomous self and not be exposed and traumatized by that sort of a situation. Oh dear Lord, my phone's running out again. I don't know why this always happens to me. So as I was saying, it's another thing. I was talking about something else, but I'm going to move on to the next thing, which is being aware of inverted narcissists. These are a type of narcissist that literally only associate with other narcissists, and sort of like to validate the narcissist, are often a flying monkey or a you know, enabler of a narcissist. And it's something to be aware of, because you can be confused as to why they might not associate with you. It's a type of narcissist that only associates with other narcissists. It's called an inverted narcissist. It's just something to be aware of. If you feel like it's hitting a blank wall with them, if they're a narcissist anyway, fair enough, but it's a case of like they will only associate with other narcissists and tend to sort of like be the prime supply of a narcissist or an enabler of another narcissist. So actually, but I think I was saying how you can think and say what you want you should have the right to and feel it's okay to say and think what you want without the fear of being attacked. Be this like berated, like verbally or physically or whatever. You have the right to voice and sort of believe what you want in your own autonomous right through your free will. And it's not for anyone else. Even if you've been conditioned this way, it should be a goal at least, and it's kind of good to validate how your experiences have been. But you know, that needs to be like the goal if you want to be healthy, and it shouldn't be, you know, I'm not telling you what to do, but it's a case of like you shouldn't be in fear of attack for voicing your opinion, because often we live in this PC culture, which I honestly don't believe serves many people. It might serve, you know, obviously some people to have a sense of knowing when to keep your mouth shut, but when it comes to toxic people, it's like you don't need to like strip down your sense of self because they're unable to keep an emotional stability. Reduce resentment for being assertive and assess a person in the situation to take action. Oh god. Okay, so I think I was saying that yeah, I think another way you can reduce resentment is to assess a situation and take action that is needed in a situation given you've assessed it correctly. Because I think, as I said, a lot of resentment can come from a case of you're not being reciprocated in the way that you wish in certain situations. And once you're sort of aware and sort of like, you know, connoting from a situation given, you know, the information that's been presented to you, how you're likely to get an interaction, it's important. It really helps reduce resentment towards a response you get, and yeah, that's kind of self-explanatory, because obviously if you're expecting to get an abundance of validation, love, care, help, you know, from a situation where someone's toxic, you're going to be resentful of that situation because you're going to have this level of cognitive dissonance and inner hitting a brick wall, and crazy making if you keep expecting that from a situation that is not going to happen. So I suppose it's just a sense of honesty and time with yourself when you're willing to look at that, and it does take time, I think, to decondition yourself. Your brain is a muscle, your body is a muscle, and if you've had this for prolonged periods of time, it can take a lot of time, and that's needed. So I think the next thing I was talking about was people that have often, I'm not sure if this is associated with narcissists or borderlines. I think it's just a case of people in your mind, you get your id and your ego, and you have a super ego, which kind of it's basically an inner parent, if you want to look at it that way. And narcissists have this very antagonistic inner parent, because they cannot, it's just this sense of consistent conflict they have, whether that's between themselves and their sense of grandiosity and their sort of like subconscious awareness that they're not that level of grandiosity, or people's interactions with them that interferes with that sense of grandiosity that's not being perpetuated and is what it is. You know, so you can sense that level of projection on you from another person, because of that inner sense of conflict that's sort of going on. You know, it can be a case of when someone has discarded you or you're in that level of abuse, you can actually feel that sense of, or you can find verbally people sort of having that unrelenting inner parent kind of style of conversation with you, which is sort of like a manifestation of that inner conflict that they're kind of then projecting upon you. And that's something to be aware of. That's not your fault. It's not because you're doing anything wrong. It's not because you're, you know, for any other reason, because often people that are abused are going to justify it to whatever extent that makes sense to them at that time. But when this happens, it's just about sort of identifying the patterns of a toxic person and discerning and finding what it's actually about. And as I said, people have healthy levels of narcissism. People do this on an everyday basis to an extent, but it's just to what extent that occurs. Another way they can project is about their incompetence. They can project their incompetence upon you and their lack of fun. Like, for example, by saying you're boring, it can give them a sense of perceived leverage, because something I've learned about narcissists in the recent past is often it's all about mindset, potentially for them, because oh no, my chocolate's melted on my bed. Oh, what a mess. It's like Cadbury's chocolate factory in here. Oh, that's going to need to go through the wash. Okay, we'll leave that for a bit. It doesn't melt through to the mattress though. Oh dear. We'll let it be for a sec, so I think it'll be alright. So just to finish is, yeah, so they can like, it's all about compensation for them. It's all like a transactional game situation. You know, if they perceive themselves to have a lack of fun, because it's not likely that they'll be able to have innate fun. Their fun comes often from materialism, and that sort of like sense of like low-key fun. That is what it is. But if they feel that they have a lack of fun, they will project and overcompensate for themselves, saying that you're boring, you know, making out you're some form of like bookworm, or like you can't have a good time, whatever. And often it's quite the opposite. When people are able to actually let loose and have fun genuinely, it's a lot more fun to be around than a toxic person, because often people, especially that psychopathic, can be very plain, boring, and very from mundane to just plain boring to be around, and they need that sort of stimulation to keep life interesting, which, you know, is toxic stimulation. And imagine doing that yourself, how fun that would be for you to do. Obviously we're all programmed in different ways, but I can't imagine that being very fun or validating to myself. So I suppose it's just a sense of, even if they're projecting their incompetence, it can be like, oh, like this is like an invalidating situation. Like, you know, if they're feeling incompetent about something, it's like, you can't do that, like, you know, you're incompetent and blah blah blah, because it's like a projection of their, you know, incompetence and displacement that they're unable to sit with themselves. Often as well, I've noticed a love bombing technique in my relationships can emerge in terms of a style of communication rather than building discernment and being genuine in a situation. And again, I think this adds to like low level value that comes from a genuine relationship. Like, even though the relationship might be genuine and high value in itself, it's just a style of talking. You don't need to blow smoke up someone. It's not just it's nice to receive a compliment and give one. You don't need to blow smoke up someone's ass for them to like you. And even if you don't mean it in that way, it's just the way you go about a situation. I'm going to kind of speed up a little bit because I could literally ramble forever, but I don't want to keep like deleting videos. You can find your own closure and not filling world systems. You have to find your own closure in narcissistic relationships. Like, you can't find that closure through them. They will never bring closure to you because they want the inevitable push and pull, the cat and mouse situation. I've heard you're supposed to be like a dead mouse. Like, you know, a cat's not going to go for a dead mouse. If you play like a dead mouse, they're not going to go for you because they're going to think they're not interested. And when you stop playing and engaging in their games, you become a dead mouse. So that's kind of the idea. It's not to kill yourself. It's in this cat and mouse game, kill the mouse. You know what I mean? You don't need to be a running around mouse, running away from them all the time. You know, it's not going to benefit you in any sense. It's like play with the pigs, you get dirty. That's the mentality. So not filling what rating systems. Narcissistic. Yeah, this was more of like a worldly sense of things, of you don't need to follow world system. Like, it's kind of a bit philosophical, but often like work environments and stuff, it's very well known you can have toxic bosses. I've come across a few of them, and a work environment and a culture, be that in the world or be in a work environment, it can be poisoned by narcissistic conditioning in various ways. That can just be perpetuated in various ways. And that's why it's important to make your own choices about how you live your life and not sort of live from a sort of conditioned situation that might sort of be perpetuating a lot of different ways of being that may not be fully thought out in your mind. And I guess deprogramming that sort of situation. So we all go to school, we all go through institutions and stuff that perpetuate this sense of, you know, things that happen, and we do build discernment from that naturally, I think. But it's also about ongoing to make your own choices. Obviously, you don't have to be an autonomous being and free thinking in every single situation. Obviously, things, you know, systems can be very helpful. But in terms of actually maybe things that step outside your comfort zone, you don't actually have to tolerate that level of anything you're not comfortable with, and to question that stuff within yourself. The next thing I want to talk about is how we all find information at different times. And it's not for someone else to tell you or invalidate your way of thinking or being in life, and it's not for them to assess whether you're correct. If they're giving you positive feedback and actual feedback that will actually benefit you potentially in some way, then fair enough. If you feel that you trust that person enough to listen to that advice, you don't have to trust everyone else with your information and take advice from every Tom, Dick and Harry that comes along to offer it, because often it can just be a sense of narcissistic rage and projection that is trying to validate your situation in order to gain leverage, and that's something to be aware of with narcissistic people. But let me write that down. So yeah, it's definitely a sense of building trust in relationships that needs to be there in order to give out certain information, and otherwise you are putting yourself at risk potentially. Just bearing that in mind, it's a situation that can arise, and it's important, I find, to actually be conscious, in my experience, of actually what you share with who and with whom, in order to just not put yourself in a vulnerable situation. Because narcissists will inevitably use whatever ammo they have, from an instinctual level even to, it's not even, you know, a choice with them. Often it's just what will happen. So I suppose it's even a level of, like, you know, you give that sort of information to them, it will inevitably come back to hurt you, you know, in whatever way you invalidate them or perceive to be invalidating them, it will come back at you. But obviously there are ways of discerning and not taking that in as a person, setting boundaries, because they will inevitably move on if they're not getting what they need from you. Because, you know, even if they do try and reject that stuff off you, if they're not getting the reaction they want, which is supply or attention or whatever else, they're not going to persist with you. They have a very small amount of energy to actually exert, because of all the energy it takes to actually manage their own personality and cognitive dissonance and grandiosity, and validate that within themselves, and you know, discern what other people are saying and thinking about them, whatever. We have a very, very small window of actual time and sort of capacity to be able to go around people that have it all figured out and try and, you know, re-traumatize them. If you've been healed, the chances are they're not going to go about trying to re-traumatize you, because you're already kind of on it, and sort of, you know, not going to kind of, you know, trying to think of a good analogy here. You're not going to sort of like slip on a banana that you slipped on 5 minutes ago. Do you know what I mean? You're just going to see it and move past it. So oh, I've literally lost. So a narcissist, potentially that you've been abused from or whatever, is not the centre of the world. I believe, like, God is the centre of the world, whether you believe in that or source energy, or, you know, just, you know, not that person. No one is the centre of the world, even though lots of people like to believe they are and condition people to believe they are. They're not the centre of the world. They're not, you know, God's gift to the earth. Yes, and they might be God's gift to the earth, but they're not the centre of the planet. They are a human being with a personality problem that does not come to accept that they're not the centre of all attention, even though some people are extremely attention seeking. It does not make them the centre of the world, and some people can't come to that resolution that they're not the centre of the world. And it's not for you to take on managing that ego issue within them. You know, just because they're it's their belief doesn't mean it has to be yours. And often when you sort of overtly oppose their beliefs, it will repel them, and that's the kind of thing when you're trying to heal from this sort of stuff, that you'll want to accumulate a lot of ways to be able to do that. Not that you have to fight them off necessarily, because they like a fight, but when you actually are logistic and unintegrating of their sort of delusional beliefs, it will repel them, because obviously they don't resonate on the same level as you anymore. You resonate on a high level that is obviously truthful, and they live on a level that is, you know, built from fear, basically, or having their true self exposed. You don't need to live on that level with them, you know, just because they're on that level. Racist propaganda. Oh, actually, let's not talk about worldly issues. So this is an idea of people won't always be happy about you healing from a situation like this. Some people will not feel that it is good for you to obviously transcend their abuse. They obviously won't like that. They'll like to keep you in the loop of their abuse and on their hamster wheel. And it says in the Bible, a nice little worldly quote just to validate your experiences is, whoever is hated by the world, aka narcissistic people that aren't in your life but in the world, because we all live in the world, Jesus was hated by them first. The world hated him first, and not to say that we're Jesus, no one is Jesus, you know, we're all a mixture and concoction of different levels and whatever. I'm not going to get all biblical, but Jesus was hated by the world first, and, you know, people are going to discard you. People are not going to like it when you transcend this sort of a situation. It's an inevitable fact, and it will have its pluses and it will have its minuses. You know, you might get some backlash, which will be a minus, but you might get some pluses in that people that are toxic move away from you and they don't even bother with you anymore, which is actually a massive plus in my eyes, because you don't have to deal with them anymore. And if they move away from you first, then hallelujah, you know. Otherwise, you can cut them off. But I mean, we all have autonomy and control to cut people off, go no contact, and you don't have to tell them that you're doing it. You can just do it. However you minimise the contact is another way of going about it, but you can also just fully cut them off. You don't even have to tell them. You can just block their number and never talk to them anymore. It's a scary thought to some people because of the immune system and because of the conditioning that you have on an innate level and a lizard brain level. It's so normal to feel absolutely terrified about the situation, especially if it's someone you've had contact with for a long time. You anticipate the feelings. I would suggest journaling what the worst case scenario is if you do have that happen, and kind of come to the conclusion and of how you are feeling about that situation at the moment. Is it the right time to cut them off? Is it your time to limit contact? Is it time you want to aim towards cutting them off fully? Do you need more time to heal ongoing? You know, is it a relationship you want to keep? Is it a healthy enough relationship you want to keep? You know, I guess it's about looking at, I've heard you need to look at failures, losses, successes in your life and in relationships, and assess whether, you know, is a relationship you want to keep or a situation you want to keep with yourself or with another person, discarding if it's not something you want to keep, or if it's something like if you've got a lot of losses with that person and it's just something you need to move, you know. I'm talking about narcissistic toxic relationships here, not healthy relationships that move away from each other. But anyway, I was trying to like rush so I didn't get time run out, but I'm gonna just delete something else. So narcissists, okay, another thing that can be projected on you is impulsiveness as a person, in terms of, you know, like, and this can be presented verbally as, you know, you're always doing that, like, why are you why are you always so, you know, out of control? Like, why don't you ever take the time to actually relax and have patience? A trait of psychopathy and in particular is that, which is associated with covert narcissism, is the fact of they cannot, you know, there's a sense of impulsiveness, there's a sense of lack of patience, and it can be projected on you and not even learnt as a person if you've experienced this type of stuff. You have to learn things like patience, because patience is something that you learn and get conditioned with. It's not something that just comes innately. You know, patience is like a skill that needs to be learned. You know, narcissists don't often have patience because of their dysregulation and their impulsiveness, and, you know, because they're not perceptive of you. They don't know, maybe they perceive you to an extent what you're like, but they don't have any interest in getting to know you as a person, because you're merely a tool to them. If you're not going to validate their sense of self or give them something that they want, you're not of use to them, and therefore they will discard you, and that's just the honest truth. So you can also do this thing called reverse hoovering, and deciding you want to be in contact with someone else, as in a toxic person. And I think it's a sense of manifestation that comes into this to an extent for me, that says, you know, if you don't desire them back, like, often you can get conditioned with abuse too, and it's kind of a chemical reaction in the mind that happens. That's a bit of an addictive sense, or just a trauma bonded sense, shall I say, of, you know, when you're sort of denied that, you know, emotional response, which they will inevitably do because they're unable to offer an emotional response because of their shallow level, but they'll also withhold, obviously, emotion and other things to make you in some way believe that you want to hoover them back in. Hoovering is something they do to recycle you as a person. Not all narcissists are recyclers, but some are, and they will try and sort of get you back into their web if you've sort of autonomized and gone off and done your own thing. But deciding consciously that you don't want to be in contact with them can actually manifest them not contacting you in some ways, if you want to look at it that way. But it also disallows you of reverse hoovering, which is doing the same thing to yourself and sort of hoovering yourself back to that relationship, even though it's not consciously something you want, it's just something you're used to and conditioned into. Again, from a sense, I believe God has a plan. and he will save us all. It's just sometimes we have to be conscious of these things that happen before he's fully allows us to completely be released from these situations. You know, I'm not blaming God for these situations, but he does allow bad things to happen in our lives to discern us against negative things for the future. Also, another projection that they can do, narcissists don't have boundaries. They are intimidating, often, if they're sociopathic, and you can mimic this pattern in your own life and just disregard boundaries, not necessarily meaning to, but again, it's just a sense of conduct that you may have picked up in narcissistic relationships, which should just be disregarded if you notice this is happening. But obviously we do all have a sense of narcissism, and you have the right to break boundaries should you need to, and obviously healthy, like, boundaries being broken, I don't know, it's not about being like hyper vigilant about what boundaries you're breaking, because, like, we all have boundaries, and, like, on a small level they will be broken. You have to, like, stand up for your own rights, which is why a healthy sense of narcissism is very important. But in terms of actually, you know, navigating life, you don't have to actually go about life in that manner if you notice that you are doing that. But obviously just something to assess within yourself. So, because it can just put people off, you know, and it can frighten people, and you might be sort of you might be traumatizing someone else on a really small level. Obviously, you shouldn't blame yourself, because it's just a level of conditioning you've been accustomed to. But I suppose just in terms of conducting yourself in the healthiest possible way you can, it's just about, I suppose, being authentic in terms of how you conduct yourself, and I suppose not allowing it's just a sense of, like, having the right relationships that are high value, and just really just discerning from the relationships which are somewhere in between. And I guess this is another projection, but in terms of psychopathy and sociopathy, really, which is the main thing for this, is they have a parasitic lifestyle, and when this is projected on you, it can just be a sense of, you know, you feeling that either you are being parasitic to others for a start, which is going to be wrong, you know, unless you are sociopathic, but let's assume you're not. Obviously borderlines have sociopathic tendencies, but it's a case of you either feeling that you're taking too much from a certain person, being parasitic to another person, which often you're not, just from an energy level. There's vacuums and there's radiators, and if they're the vacuum and you're the radiator, then you're not going to be being a parasitic to that situation. But it's also a case of like you feeling like you need to act in that way, like you need to cling to people in order to, you can be clingy for lots of reasons, but if you feel clingy because you feel like you're a parasite, or you've internalized that projection, you just don't feel this sense of freedom, I suppose, that you could feel, in autonomy and sort of assertiveness and confidence that you might feel more so if you didn't internalize that parasitic projection. And another thing, just if they're irritable or irritating to themselves, or intolerable even, and they project that on you, it's coming from a sense of themselves, not you, obviously, another projection. So yeah, that's all my information. Hopefully I can chuck it all in one video and not have issues with storage. Thanks for listening, bye.